All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. Come on. You can't hear me at all? I can yell. You can hear me? Can you hear me? If I'm not coming over that, I can just yell. I have a 12-year-old. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here to introduce the person who's going to introduce our speaker. I'm the preamble. So, and I have to stay on the light because I forgot my glasses. I'm very sorry. So first of all, I just want to say how excited I am to be able to do this today, that it was born of the collaboration between the Doctors Moore. One of the things that Kendall Moore and I started talking about way back, born of the University Campus Climate Survey, is could we establish a program where somebody or a faculty member or somebody from one college could come and do sort of an internal sabbatical in another college, maybe be let out of teaching or not, but also just enable the opportunity to develop some creative works and some scholarship that would maybe bring some interdisciplinarity to our research or our creative works and share that knowledge across multiple colleges to benefit the university. One of the things that was most in demand after the Campus Climate Survey was an opportunity for personal and professional development without having to travel really far away or leave your family. So I was really pleased when Dr. Moore came up with the concept of actually piloting that between arts and sciences and GSO. And I think Andrea Miller, who will next take the mic, will talk to you a little bit more about that. So I'm really pleased. I'm going to I had to think about a few things of what I wanted to say for this introduction, since it's two really incredible people who are going to speak next. So first, I'm really pleased to welcome everybody and our distinguished guest to a special seminar on the synergies between ecosystem health, humans, and racism. We are so honored to have Dr. Tiara Moore here today with us on such a beautiful afternoon. But before we dive into the program, I would like to talk a bit about our campus community. URI has a number of different groups and projects working in DEI space, which is an incredible testimony to commitment, but we must work towards a true, cohesive, and integrated DEI strategy as an institution to address our shared future. As such, I reiterate and reaffirm my personal and our institutional commitment to working with all of you to ensure that the Bay Campus is a community that rejects racism, hate crimes, and discrimination in all forms. This type of change requires meaningful participation from our community, and we are slowly making progress. I'm grateful to partner with Assistant Dean Princess Matouche, who couldn't be here today. She's traveling. Ms. Andrea Miller, the NBC JEDI Committee, and so many of the students, faculty, partners, and staff who have demonstrated commitment and action. And that next step actually is action. From learning to create policies about implementation to justice and equity, we have so much work to do. We struggle with how, as an institution, we go about handling informal reports of sexism, racism, and discrimination without putting the burden on the victims to formally report and thus making the vulnerable more vulnerable. At the same time, how does an institution protect the rights of all parties in a report until facts are found? We must examine how we change a campus climate that is governed by policy, administrative procedures, and pedagogy. We must ask what policies are in place that enhance or detract from equity and inclusivity, and how do we, the Bay Campus community, work with our unions, university leadership, and each other to ensure that we do more than simply embrace, enable, and make make visible certain identities. Together, we must continue to examine our language, our campus climate, and our institutional policies and power to better understand ways we can deconstruct systemic inequities and construct an equitable educational environment. So regrettably, incidents happen, things happen all around the country, and these are, born of what I think are horrible systemic practices, from gender and gender identity to race and culture, that happen around us all the time. And of course, these can trigger a range of responses. Please know that support is available to all of us at any time. I'm deeply grateful to many on campus, including our Assistant Dean, Princess Matouge, and our facilities and maintenance team for their initiative in working towards establishing a GSO Student and Wellness Center on campus to better support all employees, a need long overdue. In addition, with the continuous onslaught of mass shootings in our country, another 3 or 4 in the last 2 weeks, I want to also acknowledge the heightened stress that we're all under and the amplification of emotions at this critical time. Please make time for self-care and consider extending additional grace and kindness to others. Know that many on campus have resources, and those resources are available to all employees. Now it's my great pleasure to turn the mic over to Ms. Andrea Miller, a GSO PhD student, and she will introduce our guest speaker. I've had the privilege of working with Andrea a number of times, especially in this past year as president of GSO and the NBC's Chowder and Marching Society. She's a dedicated leader, a conscientious scientist, and a global warrior for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Along with her dedication to science is her unwavering commitment to ensuring that obstacles to STEM and opportunities for all in the BIPOC community are just detours, but not permanent barriers to their success and opportunity. So Andrea. There we go.
Cool. Hello? Oh,
You got
okay.
it.
Yes. I don't know. Hearing yourself is so weird. Also, thank you for saying I'm a PhD student. I'm actually a master's student, but thanks for manifesting that for me, you know?
Now you get your PhD.
It's my dream for you.
And I see, and I appreciate that.
I changed it too. I thought you were a master's student.
No, it's okay. Thank you, wink, wink. But thank you all for coming. And I have the pleasure of introducing the environmental ecologist, the diversity influencer, the truth teller, and the disruptor, Dr. Tiara Moore. Being raised in South Carolina, Dr. Moore began her scientific journey as she completed her bachelor's in biology in 2011 in Winthrop University. And during her time there, she had the opportunity to venture on a research trip to Costa Rica, where she grew an interest in marine science. And soon after, in 2013, she received her master's in biology with a concentration in environmental science from Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia. And during her time at Hampton, she conducted research on linking sediment, oxygen demand, and nutrient cycling to the eutrophication of Chesapeake Bay. After receiving her master's, Dr. Moore earned her PhD in biology from UCLA, where she conducted research overseas in the Southeast Asia, the Paradise of Islands, the French Polynesia, and the coastal environments across Southern California. Where her research ranged from observing different effects of coral reef macroalgae using sediment biogeochemistry and environmental DNA to assess the biodiversity of the entire ecosystem. But after Dr. Moore completed a postdoc fellowship at the University of Washington in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy, where she used soil eDNA to develop a biodiversity census of the Ellsworth Forest for over 10 years. And as she transitions her work from the Nature Conservancy to a full-time focus on the Black and marine science, Dr. Moore never imagined one passionate and powerful tweet will lead her to be the CEO of an ever-growing organization transforming and motivating lives such as myself. And in 2020, Black and marine science started as a week to highlight and amplify Black voices in aquatic sciences and encourage the younger generation, while shedding light on the lack of diversity in marine science. The week expanded and grew into a registered nonprofit in 2022. But on top of being the founder of BIMS, Dr. Moore's work in breaking barriers in marine science does not stop there. She also founded a Women of Color space, aspiring to create a safe and inclusive workspace for women of color through workshops, individual personal trainings, and community outreach. Dr. Tiara Moore's lecture is a part of a sustainable collaboration between STEM and humanities, tackling challenges of anti-Black racism lecture series, which is funded by the College of Arts and Sciences and co-organized by Dr. Sarah Brown of Computer Science and Statistics, Dr. Amelia Moore of Marine Affairs, and Dr. Kendall Moore of Journalism. The organizers would like to thank the Dean's Office at GSO, the Office of Engagement, the ISC, and the Assistant Dean for DEI, Princess Matuj. And it's so hot, you guys. You just don't know. But I don't know, and then for me to say that, that's a lot. I don't know about you all, but I am excited to hear about this love affair that she has for this afternoon. I know her as Dr. Tuffy, the white supremacy slayer, but I am honored to introduce you to Dr. Tiara Moore.
Hello. All right. Can y'all hear me? I was told there is no clicker, which seems like it's impossible. All right. But I'm gonna just believe it. That is the case. We confirm there is no clicker, so I'm supposed to stay right here. All right. That's gonna be an issue, but I'll try. I really will try because it's in my heart to be over there and move. But anyway, all righty. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you so much for welcoming me and inviting me in your space. So yeah, my title, Eutrophic Estuaries and Racist Systems, a Love Story. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is, some of my research, my experience getting into this PhD life, but then also, some of this real life, I would say just trauma that I had to deal with in navigating these spaces. So I really do ask that you honor my truth, that you really see it as the gift that it is, and that you really listen. Take a moment to listen to what it is that I'm saying and how we can actually work together to do better, because that's the whole goal. We all came out here 4 o'clock. So let's just put on our listening ears, but also just understanding that everybody's experiences are different. And this is my story, my love story, as you mentioned. Oh, I got water up here. Thank you, Brittany. All right, so I always start my talks doing my favorite thing, and that's talking about myself. So I identify as a Black queer woman who is originally from Greenwood, South Carolina. So if you're wondering where that accent is from, that's it. I went to Winthrop University to get my Bachelor's of Science. I was actually there pre-med. I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician. Then I realized I didn't like working with kids like that, so it wasn't gonna work out. So I started taking other courses, and there was this tropical ecology class, and I remember signing up because they were going to Costa Rica for spring breaks. I was like, ooh, free trip, hey. It wasn't free, y'all. They put that on my tuition. I found that out later, much later. But anyway, in my head, it was free. But when I got there, we were on a boat, we're collecting water samples and we're doing these experiments, and there's senior scientists there teaching us. I'm like, what is this? Is this a job? Is this your career? And that's when I found out about the world of marine science and it being a job and something that I could do. So I came back very excited about that. And I was like, hey, I want to go to grad school. I want to continue on and become a marine scientist. And so at the time I decided I wanted to go to a HBCU, or historically Black college or university, because I had been at Winthrop, which was a predominantly white institution. So I wanted to switch it up. And so I'm like, okay, where are the HBCUs with master's programs in marine science? I did not realize how difficult that was going to be, but I found one at Hampton University. And I remember writing in my personal statement, hey, I took this one class, but accept me because I'm going to be the best marine scientist ever. And they did. They didn't give me no scholarships though, but they accepted me. And they said, if you can figure it out, you could come. You have a dream. And I did. And so I actually went there, became a marine scientist, I'll say, did my first research project in the Chesapeake Bay. I was like, yes, I could do this. So I went on to get my PhD at UCLA. I'll actually talk about my research that I did while there later. Finished that, went on to continue to do my postdoc. There was a whole lot that occurred there. Actually, won't spend too much time on that. And then now currently, as was mentioned, I am the founder and CEO of Black and Marine Science, actually starting April 3rd. I started as a full-time employee at Black and Marine Science, and I left the Nature Conservancy. Yes. All right, so that's that. So we're gonna go to a little research, a little trauma, a little triumph, a little group. Y'all ready for it? All right. So a lot of my research is based on humans. Humans are causing major environmental concerns, social concerns as well, but we're talking about the environment right now. So things like destruction of habitat, there's not enough Targets, Walmarts, we need our new pretty buildings, so we tear down entire ecosystems. Similar with over harvesting, it's a whole lot of folks who like to eat a whole lot of food. And now I'm not saying that everybody should go be vegan or vegetarian, but what we're doing in these ecosystems is not sustainable, or is not allowing these ecosystems to bounce back. And so that can lead to a loss of biodiversity. As you can imagine, you take somebody's house away or you take them from the ecosystem, then they're no longer going to be there to thrive, to serve those purposes that they had in that ecosystem originally. Another huge human impact that we see is nutrient enrichment or nutrient pollution. Our favorite nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, you hear about those all the time. But that can come from huge amounts of different impacts. So we have, like I said, we have a lot of folks that we now have to feed. So we have a lot of farming that goes on. Farmers just love putting so much amounts of fertilizers onto those crops so we can get so much food quick. We need food, we need it now, we need all this. But then we have a water or a rain event, all of those nutrients wash into our waterways, and then we see things like nutrient enrichment that can have adverse impacts, like leading to eutrophication. So here's an example of a macroalgal bloom. So a lot of eutrophication is from like phytoplankton blooms. You'll see red tides or green, these like blooms all over, but you can also have these macroalgal blooms as well, due to this buildup of this inorganic matter. Another human impact that we talk a lot about now, is climate change due to the input of gases in our atmosphere. The number one, I would say, culprit that we talk about a lot is carbon dioxide. We see a lot of carbon dioxide in this atmosphere. We're seeing changes in our temperature, and that is also having inverse impacts in our waterways. Probably mostly familiar with ocean acidification. So ocean acidification occurs, we have that same carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere, it's absorbed by the surface water, there's a chemical reaction, and then the water starts to get more acidic. And so here, you're looking at a shell that was put into very, very low pH water. I think conditions that are expected to be around 2100. So as you can see up at the top, we have an intact shell, but then down at the bottom, it's basically degraded. So that would be the same as somebody just coming in and start taking down the walls in your house, and then you're just left exposed. So as I'm like learning about all these human impacts, as a student, like, whoa, this is a lot. Like, how can we change? How can we fix these things? I'm seeing all these different impacts. And so I remember reading this paper back in the day, I'm about to date myself, it's not too long, but 2012, when I was first starting my educational career, and it was this idea of these eutrophication-driven acidification. And now I'm like, whoa, because I've just heard about climate change and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere leading to acidification. But now we were talking about eutrophication and these algal blooms now also leading to acidification. So I was like, dang, humans are causing so many problems that they're causing cascading problems. Like, the problems are now causing other problems. So this was like mind blowing to me. So I'm like, oh, I have to research this. This is what I'm going to do. But this was in the open ocean. I was in an area where we were actually working in estuaries. And so estuaries had the potential to be more impacted by this nutrient pollution, because estuaries are basically where the river and the ocean meet. But they also have a large watershed. It's where a lot of folks live around. So we see so much nutrient pollution because of the watershed. So I thought, well, could we see these nutrient pollution and this eutrophication in these estuaries where I was doing my research? So I made a little diagram. And so here was my whole goal, was to solve this problem. So I actually walk y'all through it. So here is what I created, this eutrophication-driven acidification, right? So we have that land runoff. This is where I'm missing my little pointer. But we have that land runoff that I mentioned, those nutrients. And so that goes into the surface water. And so we see this macroalgal bloom. And so I always want to note that nutrients do belong in the water, y'all. They're supposed to be there. But it's when it gets there and disproportionate amounts, too much. You can think of it as a buffet. Y'all know how you get when you get to a buffet. Y'all know how it gets. You would have regularly just ordered one plate of food, but now that it's a buffet, it's like, I'm getting a little of this, I'm getting a little of this, I'm getting a little of this. So that's what's happening in the water. This algae now have so many nutrients, like, oh shoot, we all coming, we all here. And so that's where we see this bloom. And so there we have this buildup of organic matter, and you would expect to see, oxygen there because they're doing photosynthesis, and then they're consuming carbon dioxide. But y'all can already see where this is going because the bloom will start to decay, start to decompose. Now we have so much bloom, we now have the opposite that's going to happen, which is respiration. So the bloom gonna die, and there's gonna be microbes that are now gonna respire it. So you can see where this is going, because when we have respiration occurring, we now have the absence, oxygen is being used, and now there is the production of carbon dioxide. So now because of this bloom, the breakdown of this bloom, we now see a direct input of CO2 that could potentially lead to acidification. Oh, wow, is this really happening? What I had to also include in this experiment, though, is the sediment. In estuaries, the sediment and the water column are very tightly linked, very shallow, different ecosystems. So what's happening in the water column will eventually also happen in the sediment. So there we'll see the decomposition of the organic matter, the microbial respiration, that same input of carbon dioxide that could lead to acidification. But then what also happens in the sediments is the regeneration of nutrients. So here we have those nutrients that can be regenerated and then flux back out into the ecosystem to start the bloom all over again. So it's like, whoa, all of this is going on. I have to figure this out. So I took my notebook as a scientist and I went to the estuary. And so as you can see, here's a bloom, just as I mentioned, right there. I'm in the estuary. There's the sediment in the shallow. So I had my pH meter, and sure enough, when the areas in the summertime when there was a bloom, it was more acidic, the pH was lower. So I'm like, okay, give me my PhD. I can go ahead and leave now. Look, I did what I said to do. But as scientists, we have these seminars, we talk, we like to probe and ask more questions. And so somebody's like, wow, how do you know what's really going on in this community? Have you looked at the microbial community? Have you looked at what's actually doing this respiration at the same time you're seeing this low pH? And I'm looking at the ecologist like, well, how you do that? Like, what do you mean? And so that's when I was introduced to the beautiful world of environmental DNA. And so I like to explain eDNA as, folks love watching crime shows. And so there is a criminal who will do something, and then the detectives comes in and they're like, oh, there's a fingerprint. We have their DNA. Let's go get them. And so that's because as we're moving through the environment, we're losing genetic material, like hairs falling out, pollen, mucus, leaves, all of these things has genetic materials and information. So I can go out, collect the water, collect the dirt sample, extract that DNA, and then tell you what's there. So here you see on the screen, little fish just swimming. But as a swimmer, you see the DNA is falling off. So I can just go up there with a little cup, sterile, and scoop it up. And then through a series of steps in the lab that has been reduced to this beautiful little photo, we can extract the DNA, tag it with different barcodes, do the PCR process where you're tagging it, and then you can identify and see these different species or see these different organisms in your ecosystem. And this is a really cool method for someone like me who doesn't necessarily maybe have that background either in taxonomy or all of these other things, but you can just use this method to then take your data, put it in a database, and it shows you what's there. And so that's what we saw. So here was our biodiversity census. In the areas where we saw the acidification, we saw that the microbes that were present did do the polysaccharide degradation that we saw for the macroalgal bloom, for the ova that was there. So we have a macroalgae that is made of polysaccharides, and so that was the degradation. And so we saw that this was why we were having this decomposition occurring. So there it was, yay. If you go back to my diagram, Now we see the microbes that are there, we see the low pH, and we know that that's exactly what their function is to do in the ecosystem, is to degrade these blooms. So it's like, hey, now you can really give me my PhD. Thank you. and so that was just, in a nutshell, all the things that, that was basically my research, what I did. And so as I presented this research and talked about it, something interesting that has come up about, I would say, my famous photo is who took the picture. So who do y'all think took this picture? So I was there in the estuary. As you can see, looks like I'm doing research, right? I'm here, I'm like doing my business, and I hear two folks, "What are you doing down there? You're not supposed to be down there. I'm about to call the police." What? I'm like, "Hey, I'm a student. I have a permit. I go to UCLA, and it's on the board. Like, please don't call the police. Like, I'm not doing anything wrong." "Oh, you're a student?" So this white couple now continues to walk towards me. "Oh, well, what are you working on? Oh my gosh, could we help you with anything?" Now my heart, because you just said you're gonna call the police on me. So now I'm afraid. Now I have to continue to do this research. Y'all know how it takes to get a permit and how long it takes to plan a field day, but now I'm here in this estuary, like, how can I allow these white people to now help me so they don't kill me? Could you take a photo? When we hear things like, "I'll call the police on you," that is a visceral reaction for Black people. I'm gonna just keep it 100 and be specific about who I'm talking about. Because we know Black people are killed by the police disproportionately. In 2020 alone, we saw 164 Black people. This year alone, we're still seeing murders. So you're just doing research, and somebody who thinks you don't belong weaponizes the police against you. That could have been the end of my story. And I just want to be clear that this happened to me before George Floyd, before it was an acknowledgement, right? But we can even have seminars like this today, that this was occurring to Black people, and especially to scientists and scholars. And so I just want to be clear that these things have been occurring, and people are still just continuing on in our research. And I say that again because we've known this, even in our field, that there's been no progress on diversity, specifically in ocean and atmospheric sciences, and who we give our degrees to. In the past 40 years, this article came out in 2018. At the same time, I was selected as a fellow, and as you can see, I'm the only Black person there. And so when I really think about, what does this lack of diversity really mean, or why do we have it, or why is there a lack of maybe understanding or acknowledgement, I have to think about back to the DNA. And sometimes, for Black people, there is trauma, literally, in our DNA. Based on the experiences that, for me, I was never, ever really supposed to think about the ocean or being a marine scientist, because of the historical trauma that runs through my DNA that people refuse to acknowledge. Like, putting a whole bunch of folks on a boat and making them slaves doesn't necessarily make people want to get on boats with white people anymore. You want to be honest. But when you have universities and schools that won't even acknowledge that there's a lack of safety, a lack of preparation, then we have these issues. And then people say, "Oh, why I always want to talk about slavery?" This is well past slavery. There's things that continue. Because now here's my grandmother's truth of why she never learned to swim. Because why, once there was access, it never really was access, because then you have folks who went and disturbed the access that they were given by putting nails or acid in their pools. And so while this became my grandmother's experience, who raised me, that was her experience, and that was passed down to me. And so I had to hear things like, don't go outside. Don't go outside. Because this is in South Carolina. Literally, where you could still, somehow we're supposed to find this peace and healing in the nature and the trees. We want to plant all these trees, but we don't acknowledge the history of trees. And my grandmother literally telling me not to go outside, or I might have a different story. And then this is much bigger than even my grandma's history, because this was my own experience as well. Here, y'all looking at a softball. And Timo is my nickname. You can go ahead and guess Tiara Moore, Timo. Let me get my noose. Just playing. Had a blast playing with you this year. So this was from my senior year in high school. This was my softball that all the teammates signed. And I was the only Black girl on the team. And so while being on that team, they would taunt me and say that they had a noose. And if I got out of line, they would use it. So these are these experiences that allow me to be able to sit here to say, okay, well, if I get out of South Carolina, I'll be better. If I go become something, it'll be different. I'll be treated better. I won't be the only Black person in the room anymore. But then that wasn't my experience. And so we fast forward to where I do become, get into this space where I'm supposed to have this freedom, and I still don't. And so now I'm fast forward and I'm a marine scientist, and I'm still this only Black person in the room now. I'm telling people I'm a marine scientist, and people say things like, oh, you get your hair wet, or oh, you get in the water, or like, what? These are these experiences. And then I'll say 2020 happened. And there was, I would call it, what I call is the racial awakening in STEM. And it was an interesting moment, because while all of these horrible murders, all these horrible things were going on, it gave me an opportunity, because my colleagues, they were listening. They were like, wow, what's happening? Like, what's going on? And I was asked, the groundbreaking question. The brown breaking. You don't experience racism, right? It was almost like, Tiara, you're not that kind of Black, right? Nobody would stomp on your neck if they saw you outside, right? I was like, wow, y'all are, there's so much work to be done. But I think this was the disconnect. There was some misunderstanding of, like, there was some level of protection that I had because I was Dr. Moore. And then it gave me the opportunity to really tell those stories that I told you, but then also to call them out, like, no, just last week, y'all all saw me coming, y'all slammed the door. Like, y'all didn't, it was like, oh, well, I didn't know that was you. What other Black person is coming in here to, like, what are y'all doing? Like, for real. Like, so these are the things that are occurring. And so I would say, before, what that did, though, is this has allowed me the power to use my voice to finally tell these stories, these things that I had thought, like, I'm not going to say anything. Oh, I'm not going to mention that my lab order was misplaced yet again, that only my chemicals didn't make it in the list. It gets to be a lot. But now they were listening, and there was an opportunity for me to tell these stories. And I would say that's ultimately what led to me finding the strength to form the organization, Black and Marine Science. So we move into the good part of the story. So BIMS, Black Marine Science, is a nonprofit organization that really has the mission to celebrate Black marine scientists, spread environmental awareness, and inspire our next generation of thought leaders. And so you see our board of directors here. Looks a bit different than the other photos I showed you. As far as our leadership team, we really have a vision to change the face of who people see as scientists, but also increasing ocean literacy in the most impacted communities. And we've been taking that serious, because I think what I've seen is that while we were, the only Black people in maybe our prospective lab, there's labs all over. And so there's one of us in each of those labs, and that's 100 of us, that's 200 of us, that's 300 of us. And so how can we use our collective power to bring healing, but also to do some like really cool projects and do some research and do some things that we no longer have to have those adverse experiences. So under our mission for celebrating Black marine scientists, we get together. We have Zoom meetings, because like I said, we're all over the world. And then we have just a series of programs. So I'm going to talk about these programs while you all just pull out your phone and subscribe to our YouTube channel, because I made this barcode that I'm very proud of. There it is. But we have a lot of virtual content. So our BIMS Bites Kids, BIMS Dives, BIMS Reads, that is all virtual content really trying to increase ocean literacy. So you'll see like 5 to 10 minute videos of just like somebody talking about nutrient pollution or coral reefs or sharks all over the world of different Black marine scientists. We have our longer versions of BIMS Dives. So those are more seminar style series. And we've had awesome speakers like Dr. Dawn Wright, the first Black woman to go to the Challenger Deep. We've had Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, Dr. Ambrose Gerald. So just some really pioneers in the field. BIMS Cares, that was something that was really requested by the membership, where we actually brought in a therapist to talk about working in isolation, working under traumatic and stress-inducing situations. So all that content just lives on our YouTube channel that people can have access to. Then our BIMS Week is our just whole week of celebrating Black excellence. Our tidal wave, and I have photos of this stuff later, is we're our scientific travel program. So we now have resources to take students, well, not even really just students, people who want to go to science conferences who have research to present to a science conference. And then our BIP Week is our scuba certification program, where we're able to get students and folks scuba dive certified. And then we also have research, outreach, and paid opportunities. Similarly, with our spreading environmental awareness, we serious about it. We are always having just events talking about the environment, talking about trying to figure out ways to make it more accessible, to get more different types of people in the room. And we're always talking about different topics. We had a whole actual panel about, taking care of natural hair while you're scuba diving. Like people talk about, oh, you don't get your hair wet. Well, boop, you just got to use conditioner, boo. Like the curls will pop back. Don't worry. But it's like when you see that as a barrier, then it's like it's a point you don't feel like you belong in that space for so long. It's like, oh, Black girls don't dive. We can. There's conditioner. All right. Just there's conditioner. And then lastly is the inspiring the next generation of scientific thought leaders. So here's just some photos of us actually being out. Like here's our tidal wave. I think this is from AGU actually. We were at the American Geophysical Union Conference. Here's our scuba program down here. Up here at the top was our setup. We went to the Essence Festival, because if you're looking for Black people, you got to go where Black people at. And the Essence Festival was the largest festival of culture. And it was an amazing experience. I think for the parents to see us there, like, wow, y'all are doing this. And then for the little kids to come up and say, oh my gosh, I want to be a marine scientist. So it was really cool. Something else we got to do last year was actually to run and participate in a STEM hands camp. And this was all for our deaf and hard of hearing colleagues. So we had a whole marine science camp, and we brought in interpreters with those students. And then my literal favorite person up here is Addie. She's our youngest BIMS member. She just turned 13, which is wild because she was 11 when we started. And so she always does just outreach events in her school. So we look at the impact of BIMS. BIMS now has about 330 members across 31 different countries. There's another barcode if you're interested in becoming a member of the organization. And I actually want to stop here because of what you mentioned in your opening remarks. Black and Marine Science is an organization that was really founded to create support for students of color who are in universities, predominantly white universities, that you're just might never get to the numbers that we would like to see, and especially at the professoriate. So can we have access to BIMS membership supported by the department so they don't have to take on that cost so they have this access to this network? Something else that we actually implemented, because we've worked with some departments, is an ally membership as well for advisors who are looking for a bit more guidance and help with working with their students who may have not, had any of that capacity building or skill set training. And then we also have organizational memberships as well for the whole team. Everybody needed. And so we put it in different levels because while we see we're offering support for our Black students, that's not helpful if nobody else in the organization is doing any change work. And that's period. You can make statements, you can do different things, but we have to put actions in place. And actions take resources, and resources is money. So if we have committees that don't have budgets, if we have statements without budgets, we aren't going to see the change. So I definitely challenge y'all to look at the BIMS memberships, those different levels, and then provide that as a resource to the students. Like, hey, we will provide you this network in this community. Our other impact is our BMCV, another opportunity for you to subscribe. But this, I think, has a little preview of it. But we now have almost 2,000 subscribers and over 32,000 views. So here's this little preview of what it looks like. And we put ASL on our content as well to make it accessible. It's all free. So it's free, quick little videos you can share. We really thought, like, how can we put content out, again, like you said, to change the face of who people see as scientists? Maybe if people saw Black people differently, we don't have the situations or just the foolishness that we've seen over these years. Like, maybe they're like, oh, wow, maybe that's a scientist right there versus just, oh, maybe that's a predator. You know, like, why is that always the case? And I feel like that was my experience. Again, like, think about going into the lab at night. Like, why can't I just be going into the lab because I belong there versus y'all see somebody's breaking into the lab, now it's police pulling up. You know, why are these the thoughts that we go to when we see Black people? So that's really a goal of our YouTube. So it is for everybody. I want you sharing it so your cousins see it and your aunties and them who may not be as, forward thinking as you. Go ahead and put us on your timeline. Oh, who are those Black people? What are they doing? Good work. Good work. All right. And then lastly, our impact, because we always got to talk about money, always got to shout out our donors, is that we've been able to raise $2 million. And I'm just so grateful. And that's been me out, boots on the ground, really talking to donors to say, this is the work that we're doing. And what did I say? If we don't have a budget, then the work is not going to get done. So there's that. Now what? Let's play this video. Marine science is lit. And so when I think about now what is, that work that needs to be, because we're like, oh, I'm happy, I'm not as sad, I'm not as depressed, I'm not ready, to leave the field. But what is that next step? Because we can be excited about the people that we found, but I know that the work continues, because when we look at the data of who is still getting PhDs in marine science, the math not mathing. Right there is still only four people out of a whole class of 416. So for me, that looks like while we see these different efforts, we also know that there are not really spaces for people to thrive in marine science. When you look at where our larger oceanographic institutes are, not only are you in a predominantly white lab space, you go into the community, and also the community that is in is predominantly white. That was largely my experience when I was doing my postdoc in Seattle. Beautiful University of Washington, but Seattle is also a predominantly white city. So here I am now, just trying to get into my apartment, key fob out, neighbors, doors, slam. Why? You see me with the key fob out. Why are you this person? So then I had to use the key fob, walk in behind it, and next turn oh, you live here? I saw you yesterday, Sally, come on. So but this is the additional stress that you have to go through to work at these top places, and nobody else is thinking about it. It's wow, isolated in the lab, and then I can't even get home after dealing with all these stuff because I don't have a safe space in the community. And that's just not discussed when we're thinking about where we have to go to be these excellent contributing scientists. So my dream is the BIMS Institute. And we have been really just doing a lot of talking about it, visioning, but also just me really trying to secure funding. And so the BIMS Institute will be the first Black-led research, outreach, communications, innovation powerhouse. We're doing everything in there. Imagine, I don't know, scripts, Woods Hole, URI, make it black. And we actually have 2 funded projects through it already. The first is bringing eDNA to the streets. Y'all know I made that title up. And I was very proud of that because nobody else would allow me to submit a title like that in a grant proposal. But when it's going through BIMS, we can. But this is a whole grant that we now got $750,000 to do a community science project to engage frontline and Black communities in Hampton Roads area on eDNA, using it as a tool, but also understanding biodiversity assessments. And then we're also partnering with Blacks of the Chesapeake, this organization of fishermen and storytellers, to pair our biodiversity data with their historical ecological knowledge. So this is going to be an amazing project. And then our last project is the Blue-Green Action Platform, Blue Gap. We actually are creating a documentary on how Black people are impacted by nutrient pollution. So I mentioned about like, there's a whole bunch of farmers and we have a whole bunch of fertilizers that are put onto these crops, and then we see all those nutrients go into our waterways. What isn't talked about is where water flows, right? So you imagine we got a whole bunch of white farmers up in Iowa putting a whole bunch of fertilizers. All of those nutrients goes to the Mississippi. Guess where the Mississippi runs all the way down to the Gulf? Then guess where the Gulf goes? To the Caribbean. And so we see these large Black populated islands being impacted by nutrient pollution, nutrient impacts. And they're like, well, what is this? This came from way, where did this come from? Why are we having these adverse impacts? Whereas we have folks up here who aren't even educated or even know that this is even occurring. So we're going to create a whole documentary to talk about that. So that is just the goal of the BIMS Institute, to be able to provide a safe space, though, an actual research lab where scientists all over the world can come and work and have this space to just do the research that they want to do, to be able to do the work that we want us to do. So if you have any more, or if you want to have any more questions about Black marine science, here is our information as I am closing out. I know I'm like over, but y'all intros was long, so I'm taking my time back. Anyway, but as I'm closing, I use this quote often, but I think, Toni Morrison said it best. Is the very serious function of racism is distraction. And I think what that looked like for me as a scientist is that while, I was educated, I saw, I'm spitting out words like eutrophication, acidification, like I was having an understanding. But then I also had an understanding of who those impacts were being, who was being affected the most. But I was, there was so much racism that I couldn't even focus on doing any of the work. I'm just trying to get my head out of the bathroom, crying, so I can just get back into my lab, And so why I say that it's distraction, because we know that race is a predictor of exposure to pollutants. And we know that these things are occurring. So here I am ready to leave this field because how people were treating me, it was like, no, let me just pivot. Let me figure out a way, because I am what is needed to be able to educate these communities to include us in these conversations that we aren't being included in. Because I didn't notice the research that I'm doing and the money, there's a whole lot of money out there, but who is it going to? Who is the work being done for? Then I think it's really important to know, because when we look at environmental justice movements, things about climate change, we look at Black and brown people, they care. It's not like we don't care. It's like, yeah, we'll fight. We took a survey, we'll fight. These things are important to us. So it was never about a lack of interest. It was always about a lack of resources, a lack of access, a lack of people who cared enough to say, hey, you can be a diver and you can exist in this space. So in closing, this is getting to my last slide for real. So in closing, as I think about my journey, think about, everything that I've been through and all the experiences, and I guess to go back to the genetics, it's like we are all at the genetic level, a bunch of A's, G's, T's, C's, A's, T's, G's, all a bunch of that. And we have such big impact that we need to make with climate change. We saw the photo, it was like the ocean was on fire. They was literally putting it out. I'm like, we have so many global impacts that are happening, is that we don't have room to push anybody out. To be honest, we literally need everyone to be there. So again, you just a bunch of A's, T's, G's, and C's at that genetic level. The same to work together. And so I would say that is really what I want you to take home, is like when you're thinking about what it is you're doing, who you're talking with, I want you to think about how are you contributing to someone else's love story. Thanks so much for listening, y'all.